Hey guys, it's Caban from True Champion Gaming, and we are back from Ascent. So our whole team went down there, and it was a really hectic weekend for every member of the team. So finally getting this video up. I know a lot of people have been asking for this video, and we have tons of more content planned as well. We'll be uploading pretty regularly to YouTube again now that we're all recovered from Ascent, just as we were doing pre-Ascent. And we're also going to be hitting the Patreon really hard. So we have plans to not only add in additional benefits to the tiers that already exist at no extra cost, but we are also going to be creating a new tier on the Patreon as well, which should be live fairly soon after this video. So definitely go check that out. We're going to be putting a lot more time into there because we've already received a lot of support on the Patreon, which we can't thank you enough for. And all of that support is going to help us continue to make the amount of content that we're able to make and the quality of content as well. So big shout out to all you guys there. And also just really quick, we'll cover a lot of this in another video, but it was really great to see everyone at Ascent, and big thank you to Weebs of the Shore for hosting just such a fantastic event. But this video is already going to be pretty long because I really want to go in depth about it, since it really wasn't on anyone's radar and a lot of people have been asking questions about it. So I'm just gonna cut right into the deck profile since there's so much to talk about. So we are on Spirit of Wind. I think that much, pretty much everyone has known that by now. So I wasn't able to use the super fancy CURs on stream. TM32 is a YouTube channel ran by Shinja and some others that did a top 8 stream, and I really recommend going and watching that. It was a pretty high quality production for how last minute it was, and just a really great stream overall. Fantastic commentators that they chose for each of the top 8 matches, and definitely worth your time to go watch. So go check that out. All my CURs were being used for the Path of Silver submission that our team did, and so I just had the normal non-foil ones, but we get to showcase that Lorraine that day one opponent saw. We have Sword of Seeking, pretty much your target most of the time with Lorraine when you're going into level 1. And then we have Ornamental. So this is usually your target when you have Rallied Advance in your hand, or when you just need that 2 damage on that one turn. Because if you don't have a sword on the field and you bring out Ornamental, this is going to give an ally +1 attack. And so you're basically getting a 2 damage sword that turn in a way. Sword of Seeking having the 2 health is why this is usually a better generic target in the early parts of the game, because now you have a sword that's sticking around for either next turn, because sometimes dealing 1 damage over 2 turns twice is better than dealing 2 damage in 1 turn once, if that made sense. So this is just your more generic one. Also, True Sight's very, very important for this meta specifically, and we'll dive into that later. But yeah, so usually when you're going Lorraine level 1, 90% of the time you're getting Seeking. Ornamental, I didn't even bring out every game, but it is one of your most commonly used Regalia items. You do usually bring it out in most games. And then next we have the Lorraine level 2. This is actually interesting because in the DOA format, we ran a similar deck list named Wind Ally Beats, and we actually did another very thorough deep dive on that deck that we posted pre-Ascent, and so you can definitely go check it out, because while they are very similar, they are actually like really different decks. I don't want to say completely different decks because it's still like Wind Lorraine with an aggro like style. But the DOA format one was more of, and the updated FTC format one that we did the deep dive on, those were both a lot more mid-rangey and stuff. And in this list, I actually felt that the level 2 was much less necessary than in our previous list. My teammate Isaac, who ended up getting second in the whole event, he barely ever brought level 2 out, he said, and even sided it out in some games just because of our material deck plan. And so definitely an interesting card, and something important to remember is that in this deck, you're not just trying to level up as fast as other decks are. If you're picking up this deck for the first time after you've played, like Merlin or level 3 Lorraine, like all these get to level 3 as fast as possible decks, you might be trying to force yourself into your higher levels and finding that the deck's just not working. And very often you'll just sit on Spirit, materialize GCR, materialize Bobble, go into level 1, and then materialize a sword and a bunch of other 0 cost stuff after that. It's very, very little advantages from the material deck and not as much as like turbo to level 3 and then unlock the strength of your deck as other decks. So hopefully that all made sense. Next up we have Tithe Proclamation. So really fantastic card. This is essentially the way that we won against Merlin. So the mid-rangey kind of deck, the Wind Ally list from FTC that was updated and the DOA version, you know, those worst matchups were always the level 3 Lorraine's, Onsol, and stuff like that, that as long as they stabilized just long enough, they would eventually get to the point of the game where all their cards give them so much more value than yours, and then they would start to just push you out of the game. And Tithe Proclamation basically helps delay that part for longer because they can't do 4 Ascension loops in one turn and then drop double Banner Knight Onsol, which, you know, obviously isn't as important in FTC, but now this is stopping the 4 Ascension loops into 2 Ghost of Pendragon and an Incarnate Majesty that would just completely push you out of the game, you know, so the theory still stands there. And also, it's just really great as a cycle, you know, like, you get to draw a card when it comes out and you are paying 1. This deck plays barely any floating memory, so you're not really ever plussing off of this card usually. You're usually just cycling, but sometimes you have too many spells in your hand and you just need to get one out, and you need to get like an ally hopefully or something. So even against a deck that might not even be getting a negative effect from Tithe Proclamation, you still might want to just bring this card out just to see different options. So this is also really helpful against the Rye matchup, of course. This is slowing down the late game, essentially, once you reach late game, because this deck is trying to win as fast as possible. So if you can push off the strength of late game, that's worth a materialization from you. Now we're going to talk about Terrafraying. This card is actually, I think, what was, for me at least, the hardest card to figure out when to bring out. This is a weird card where even against the same type of deck, like even against the same matchup, one game you might bring it out like literally turn 2, and other games you might not bring it out till turn 6 or 7, even against the same type of deck. So like this is a very hard card to just be like, bring this out in this situation, because to me it felt very situational. It's probably one of the most skill intensive parts of the material deck, because deciding when it's a good time to give up your materialization for Terrafraying was a really crucial point. And you saw that in our finals match of me versus Isaac. I feel like there were a couple of games where this got brought out incredibly early into the game, and a couple of games where this got brought out very late, even though we were literally on mirror matches. Yeah, it's very important usually for when you feel like your opponent can do a lot of attacks in one turn. But even like if you're playing against a sweep deck, like a deck that might be running Flame Sweep and Hurricane Sweep, even thinking about like timing it so that they can't do sweep or just something like that, you know, like there's a lot of factors to go along with this card, because even if your opponent can do a lot of attacks on the next turn, if you're not able to prevent those and build a board presence at the same time, there's no point to go into Terrafraying. Like there were definitely turns that if I went into Terrafraying, it would avoid me taking a ton of damage the next turn, but I chose to just go into like a GCR or a draw card instead, not really play a lot of cards from hand, just build up a hand size, and then next turn go into Terrafraying, even though it put me really close to lethal, just because then I could start to build my board presence and stop them from killing my board on the next turn. So very, very interesting card, and a lot more complicated, I think, than what people realize. Next, we have Crystal of Empowerment. This is a hard card for me to talk about because I just felt like I never got the value from this card, but Terry and Isaac both swore that they just won games off of this card. And, you know, they both finished 2nd and 5th place as well. So, like, obviously, very, very strong card. The whole point about this is to have like a Banner Knight or 2 Banner Knights, even better. And, you know, like I said, we don't really go into level 2 very often. You can sit on level 1, bring this out, pop it, and now you're getting that Banner Knight effect for that turn. So we're seeing a lot of we're seeing a lot of different decks run Crystal of Empowerment in the FTC meta. And, you know, it definitely is a really strong card. To me personally, it felt like the most lackluster card in the material deck. But like I said, my other 2 teammates that did phenomenal in the event swear by this card. So still a very, very strong card. And then we're running the 5 out of 5 Divine Relic, which is GCR, because it's still the best Divine Relic. we put out the Grail rating video way back when FTC first all got spoiled. And while a lot of the community members were really impressed by the card, me, Isaac, and Terry all separately gave it a 2 out of 5 rating before even really talking to each other. And, I think that Grail landed in pretty much the exact spot that me, Isaac, and Terry thought. And if you go back and watch that video, you'll see us talk about how it's a very phenomenal card and it just continues to get better over time, but it just reads like a sideboard card at the moment. And that's pretty much what happened in the top 8 / I think also top 32, although I didn't dive into those deck lists as often. Top 8 definitely seemed to be pretty much Ring in the main, Grail on the side for a very specific matchup. And this deck specifically, Ring is really just your best option because you're so focused on getting as many cards in hand possible to swarm the board as fast as possible. So, and because that is such an important part of the strategy, we run all 3 baubles. Now, we did have consideration of cutting the water bauble because there are other generic good material deck cards that we could put into the main material deck and maybe siding the water bauble. But through our testing, even though we didn't expect to face as much water as we did fire and wind, water bauble felt so necessary for that matchup to keep an advantage because I do think at the moment, like at Ascent, I think we were favored into any water deck there. However, if we took water bauble out, that game 1 starts to get a lot rougher. So even if we only played 1 or 2 water matchups in the whole event, that water bauble was worth that spot. So we did go for all 3. I know I've seen a lot of people just running these 2, and I think that's a very solid option, especially if your deck can maintain a really good game 1 matchup without the water bauble. But I think this deck needs that water bauble in order to have that good game 1 matchup. So yeah, basically, I don't think the material deck needs to be touched at all. There's not really any changes that we would make to those 12. So let's go ahead and get into the main deck. All right, so we're gonna start off with the best card in GA. You just have to look at that artwork to know that you have to put this card in your deck. We've talked about Woodland Squirrels quite a lot in other videos, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it has really good synergy with Gildas, Ascent Protector, Inspiring Call, Banner Knight. I mean, this card just has utility in the deck. Speaking of Banner Knight, we are running the full 4, so it's a very good synergy with Ascent Protector on turn 1. If you're going second, being a 2-drop, you can go Banner Knight, swing into something, Ascent Protector, put it back in hand, and end on a 3/4 body, which is crazy. And then obviously also the synergy with just going into level 2 naturally or doing the crystal. This is a swarm deck, so an effect that gives every other ally that you have and your weapon a +1 is just absolutely insane. And is basically, Banner Knight and Phalanx Captains are pretty much the reason that we are still on Lorraine and not on, like Sylvie or Rye or something like that, because those class bonuses are just that important. Speaking of class bonuses, this is a new addition to the swarm type deck profile, and this is Weaponsmith. So, we tinkered around with this in DOA and the FTC revised builds of Wind Ally Beats, but it just never really made the cut. You needed more utility options, and Weaponsmith was just one of the weaker allies. And don't get me wrong, Weaponsmith is one of the weaker allies in this list as well, but because this runs such a high ally count, I think we're up to like 40 allies, whereas in DOA, I think I was running like 30 or 32, and in our FTC revised build, I think we were on like maybe 34 or something like that. But this is running, almost like 2 full play sets more of allies. And Weaponsmith is perfect for this swarm strategy where, it is still a very strong ally, don't get me wrong. I mean, I got my Sword of Seeking up to like 6 durability in some matches just because this was on the board. And so that basically almost makes Weaponsmith a 2-drop 2/3 in a weird way, because you have a very, if you didn't gain any effects with Weaponsmith, you would only have 3 sword swings in this whole deck. We're not running Adversity, we're not running any sort of like Tempered Steel thing, obviously, because we're Wind, so you only have 3 sword swings. If you have a Weaponsmith out, you're getting those extra sword swings while also keeping a sword up and not breaking it to keep things like Deflecting Edge up. So while Weaponsmith is a weaker ally, it is not a weak ally. This is, not commonly thought of as a very strong card, but in the deck, it was a very, very vital core of the deck. Then we also have for Gildas, of course. So Gildas, obnoxiously strong, just a crazy ally that was slept on for a very long time. And it definitely saw its strengths from that Wind ally list that we popularized last format. And that list valued Gildas a little bit more. I think a mistake that people made playing against our team was tunneling into killing the Gildas so much, because yes, it is really strong, and the nice thing about our list is that we actually have even more 3-drop allies in this list to help balance her, so I think we can even balance her more consistently. But the thing is that this deck does not rely on play Gildas and keep her alive as much as the old list used to. And so, you know, if you're dedicating too many resources into just killing this one card, and they're keeping a lot of your other board alive, then that's a really good thing for you. Like, this has 3 health, right? I had opponents that would swing like 2 and 2 into this instead of like killing off, you know, like 2 Swift Recruits or something, which Gildas is stronger than 2 Swift Recruits, and obviously you have the whole like floating memory and bin and stuff like that, but you know, people didn't realize that our list doesn't really utilize floating memory really, and them killing the Gildas, keeping my 2 Swift Recruits alive, would let me do something like drop a Phalanx Captain for cheaper, followed up with a Banner Knight, pop Crystal, and then swarm and swing for way more. So it's a very awkward card for them to play around because it's crazy strong, but this is no longer like one of the main win cons of the deck. Whereas with our old list, it was really keep Gildas alive and keep punch in the face. Speaking of the new 3-drops, you know, Lurking Assailant has started to see play in a lot of ally decks, and it fits perfectly into here. The stealth, as long as it's awake, is incredibly strong against either a mirror match or just another ally heavy deck as well, because it really helps you keep up tempo and board control. And the level 1 effect can't be slept on either. You can keep this alive, and you actually saw Isaac do this against me in the mirror match in the finals, which was a little embarrassing that I missed it, but you know, he was level 1, he kept this up, and I swung into an awake Windrider Vanguard of his, and he went, okay, retaliate with both. And I just completely forgot that Lurking Assailant can do that, even though I played this deck. It's a very tricky effect that doesn't come up too often. And yeah, I mean, it gave him a crazy advantage in that game when he did it to me. So just a really strong card, and that 3-drop 2/3 fits right on par with the good stats of this game. We have 4 Swift Recruit in here. Floating Memory isn't the most important to us, honestly, but a 2-drop 1/2 Intercept is really strong as well. Floating Memory is just a nice bonus in case we can use it, and it just fits in with this Swarm style. We have 4 Windrider Vanguard, which is just another 3-drop to help balance Gildas, a 2/3 stat line, which is, you know, like I said, the stat line of this game, basically. The Vigor can come up sometimes for sure, especially if you have like a few of these on board and they go to sweep. Maybe you lost your board, but you also hit them back for 4 in the process, so it can help maybe push back and do a lethal turn on the next turn before the game gets too out of hand. So yeah, I mean, just a crazy card. Not really too much to talk about there, just a strong ally. This, however, would be a card to talk about. So I think a lot of people did start to realize that Dream Fairy was crazy powerful in this meta. I mean, we saw Dream Fairy hover at like $1 per Dream Fairy on TCG Player for like since Kickstarter released, pretty much, you know, like almost for like 9 months now, or however long that's been. You know, Dream Fairy has just been underrated that whole time, and I think it's fair because in DOA meta it just didn't have as much strength, but in the FTC meta we saw that shoot up to like $5 plus for Dream Fairy. At one point TCG Player was completely bought out because people realized the utility and the strength of this card. So it being stealth is like really crazy, and actually completely warped how we built our deck, specifically because of this card having stealth. You can play it on enter, target a ally that your opponent controls, put in their memory, and they can't activate that ally as long as you control this card. So that stealth is really important for it surviving. Remember, that doesn't protect it against like spells and such, so they can still do things like Sparkle Light it and everything, but in the Wind Mirror especially, this card is basically the MVP. And you can see that again in Isaac and I's finals. You can see just how important Dream Fairy is. And this is also your out to Merlin, essentially. If Merlin gets to that late game stage and they go, okay, spend my turn doing Incarnate Majesty, unless you've let them draw a lot, like if you didn't get tied out, and then they can do Incarnate Majesty plus other things. In that case, it gets a lot harder. But if they have to put down everything from their hand and bank on an Incarnate Majesty to live and bring out that Majestic Spirit, which is happens pretty often against this deck, then next turn you just go, okay, Dream Fairy, your whole last turn was mitigated, and now I'm going to swarm and kill you. And that's basically how we felt like we still had a good Merlin matchup. This card just does everything in the deck, and I just can't talk about how good it is. And the fact that it's also a 3-drop as well is just insane, because you can open up with Gildas on turn 1 if you're going first, and then let your opponent do their open, go second, or go on your second turn, play Dream Fairy. Now Gildas is balanced. You just put whatever they did on their first turn back into the memory. They can't play it again next turn, and you're swinging 5 into their face because you've already controlled the board with Dream Fairy. Just an insane card. And honestly, like sometimes you'll just get those games too where you Dream Fairy something and like that just locks them out of the game because they had 2 or 3 cards in their hand. Like Dream Fairy and a Ghost of Pendragon is always scary because if they do somehow kill Dream Fairy, you're allowing them to get the on-enter effect of Ghost of Pendragon again. But it's a really, really strong thing to do sometimes because like I had an opponent where I Dream Fairyed their Ghost, even though it felt like kind of the wrong thing to do. It just seemed right based on that game situation. And then later they told me, yeah, I had 3 Ghost of Pendragon in my hand of like 5 cards. And that was how they were going to completely roll me out of the game by just keeping on playing Ghost of Pendragon turn after turn, even though I had Tithe out, and trading board and drawing. And like that would have absolutely won them the game doing that. But since I Dream Fairyed them and basically turned their entire hand dead, it just won me the game. And Terry and Isaac had some similar experiences too, where you know, like you can get a Stalwart Shieldmate off the board so that they lose out on their floating memory and their defensive card, and basically their whole first turn's negated. Going against Arthur is crazy because Arthur, if they go first, play it in rest, give it Immortal, that does not stop it leaving the field. It just stops it from dying. So Dream Fairy's effect to displace it off of the board and into memory will work, and you can really stop some strong plays there. So I probably spent too much time talking about Dream Fairy, but that card deserves every second of it. So let's just go ahead and hop into another crazy strong card, Ascent Protector. So this is one of our team's favorite cards, and you know, going first, just dropping Squirrel Ascent Protector with them having 0 interaction and being able to get a 3/4 intercept body on board your first turn is just unbelievable. I think both Isaac and I were able to do that to each other in the finals, and you can just tell how strong of a start that was. Not only is that, you know, one of the biggest strengths of this card, but yeah, you can do it going second with like a 2-drop as well, or just like I said, a 3/4 intercept. That's huge. That's how you survive those aggro matchups. That's how you can really take care of a lot of stealth units as well. If you're playing against a Fire Xander, you know how problematic those Korhazi Couriers can be. And if you can just drop an Ascent Protector and not even swing with it, just leave it up, now they're not really able to swing with their Korhazi Couriers unless they want them to die. So Ascent Protector is a crazy strong part of the deck, and also probably one of the more skillful parts as to just when to play this card because of how your opponent can interact with it as well. There's a lot of interactions with them killing something on your board, Zephyring something. Like there's a lot of ways for them to mess up the Ascent Protector play, so knowing when to cast it, not like, and also just when to attack with it too, is so important, because it's a really hard decision in some games whether to swing with it and apply pressure onto your opponent or keep it active as a defensive card, either for your life points or just for itself. Because if you swing with it, now it's vulnerable. They just have to put 4 damage into it and it dies. But if you keep it active, they might not want to be swinging allies into it because you're also going to take one back out. So just a really, really strong card, and like I said, I think a little bit more in-depth than people realize. We have 4 Phalanx Captain in here as well. Again, this is a Swarm deck, so 4 Banner Knight, 4 Phalanx Captain. That's the reason that we're playing Lorraine. A lot of people think it's for the free sword materialization. A lot of people also realize it's for these Swarm type cards like Phalanx Captain and Banner Knight. The sword's nice, of course, but we did a lot of testing with like other classes as well, like Rye aggro and everything, and it wasn't really the sword that we felt we were missing out on. It really was the Phalanx Captains and the Banner Knights. So just a crazy strong card. We also have, so that was it for the allies. That was the 40 allies there. We have 4 Deflecting Edge. This is a card that feels like everyone just completely replaced with Resolute Stand from FTC. And while I agree that most decks in the current meta should be playing Resolute Stand over Deflecting Edge, I think people kind of did forget about this card a little bit too much. This card was really important in the DOA meta, and Resolute Stand is a very strong card as well, but it did not make this card worse. It was just a different option. And in this type of deck, Deflecting Edge was the better option for us. And I believe that there are other lists that should play Deflecting over Resolute as well. So we don't play Resolute, not even in the sideboard. Deflecting is just so important because, like I said, this is a swarm type deck, right? And we spend most of our materializations drawing anyways. So if you can exchange a card from hand to keep your tempo and keep your board alive, it is crazy strong. Dream Fairy is one of the most important cards to see in the mirror, but so is Deflecting Edge. It's just very, very, very valuable. And it's also a way for you to swing with your Ascents and stuff if you're against like a fire aggro matchup. If you have 1 or 2 of these in hand, you know you're going to be safe, and so it allows you to have a defensive option in hand and apply damage on board. So really great card. We have the 4 Inspiring Call. Again, Swarm. That's all I'll say. Giving everything +1 works in a Swarm deck. All right, now we're gonna get to a kind of weird part. We have 3 of 4 different wind spells and skills and stuff like that. So we are running 3 favorable wind. Now, the point of this deck again is Swarm, and so it's a lot different from the previous iterations of wind allies, which is why we're calling this a different deck, because most turns you are putting your entire hand down if you can. If you have an 8-card hand and you have 2 3-drop allies in hand, usually the best play is to put 6 cards down in memory and put those 2 3-drop allies out. It's not as like, you know, well, I'm gonna do the typical win thing where I pass with 3 cards in hand, and do I have favorable, do I have deflecting, do I have reclaim, do I have displace, do I have Zephyr? Like the typical win shenanigan trick kind of hand where they're always passing with 3 cards in hand. That is not the point of this deck. The point of this deck is to go as wide as possible, as fast as possible. And so we really tried to limit the amount of spells so that we could fit as many good allies into the deck as possible. So favorable wins, was it strong sometimes? Yes. Would I actually maybe cut an additional one out of the list? Probably. Merlin being in the meta as well means that this no longer really is just a free, burn this at the end of my opponent's turn, even if I don't want to use this card, just to use the floating memory. And again, we don't have a lot of 1-drop floating or material deck cards. We don't really usually need to go into level 2. That floating memory really isn't as valuable in this deck. And so, you know, a lot of skilled players will already play around this card anyways if you have 2 cards in hand and stuff. So it's strong, but don't get tricked into being the more mid-range win deck with this deck. Basically play down your hand at all times. We have 3 displace. Again, you know, that 4th copy isn't here because similar to favorable wins, we needed more allies, and you really don't want to have that hand where it's like 1 to 2 allies in hand and 5 spells. That's a death sentence with this deck. And so we ran as small of a spell non-ally type core as possible. And again, I'd almost consider going down to 2 displays in the deck. It is really strong. It can lead to some very tricky situations. So it is strong and probably should stay at 3, but yeah, we have 3 Rallied Advance. So this is a card that a lot of people were like, what is that card? They had to pick it up and read it. So this is one of those options that we, earlier I mentioned Dream Fairy warped how we built our deck, and that's because we realized just how strong that card was in the meta and how often it would probably be played against us and how strong that would be of a play against us. And so Rallied Advances in here because it's a 2-cost, 1-attack sword. So if you're level 1 with your Sword of Seeking out, now you can deal 2 damage with the Sword of Seeking. Sword of Seeking will grant the attack True Sight, and Dream Fairy has 2 health. So this is our perfect out to Dream Fairy. Unless they do have something like Deflecting or Favorable or something like that, this is going to kill it, which is going to really, really help you out. And the class bonus is to wake up a target ally you control. So basically, we cut the Second Wind out of the deck. Like I said, this relies a little bit less on the Gildas win condition, so even though Second Wind does pair with Gildas a little bit better, Rallied Advanced fit a lot more boxes. So you're usually only losing out on 1 damage because of just the way that Rallied Advanced versus Second Wind works. But the pros is that you can do 3 separate attacks instead of 2 separate attacks that are relying on the first one going through. So with Second Wind, you want to swing, you want to do Second Wind before damage calculates, so you can restand, get that additional damage from Second Wind, and then have that damage go through. However, if you're playing against a red deck that just kill spells your ally, or a green deck that has like 13 different options to stop that attack from happening, it feels really bad because now you missed out on your damage, you lost tempo on that turn, and you lost a card from hand. And so we didn't really like how all-in Second Wind was. And so Rallied Advance is going to allow you to split up your attacks a lot more. So this also kind of helps board control a little bit more. You can clear, if your opponent's swarming the board, you can clear more low-level targets than like the Second Wind strategy can do. And if you only want to clear 1 or 2 high-level targets, you can still do that same amount of damage or a very similar amount of damage. So yeah, this card was just absolutely phenomenal. Almost would consider putting it to 4. Like if you do want to cut a Displace or Favorable Winds, or actually probably the next card that we talk about, this would be one of the non-ally. This is the only non-ally card that I would consider bumping up to 4 from a lower count. So yeah, just a phenomenal card overall. Then we have 3 Attune the Winds, another card that people kind of knew what this card did, but were very shocked to see it in the deck. So we tried to make Attune the Winds work with previous Wind ally list, but again, they just didn't have the ally count to really make that work. Since this is more of a swarm list, you can actually make Attune with the Winds possible, and this card felt like the MVP of the deck. This card won us games for sure. It just allowed us to get to situations that weren't possible without this card, and it was crazy strong. However, all of that said, all 3 of us agreed that this was also the weakest card in our deck. And the reason why is because this is the most situational card in the deck. Rallied Advance can still be used in any situation, even if you're not optimally using the card. You know, Displace can even be used to keep like, you know, one of your creatures alive or something like that. Same thing with Favorable Winds. Inspiring is always replacing itself, and Deflecting Edge just has so much utility at any point in the game pretty much, right? But Attune with the Winds, you had to have a pretty specific board. You're never going to cast this if you only have, I shouldn't say never, because I actually did do this, but you usually aren't going to cast this if you only have like 1 ally on board. If you're in a situation where you and your opponent are board trading throughout the whole game, and you know you're usually just left with an empty board at the start of your turn, this is going to feel incredibly weak in your hand. So it was one of the strongest cards because of the effect that it gave, but it was also one of the weakest cards because this is an incredibly consistent list. You're usually just trying to swarm the board and go face. So every single ally in this deck has a purpose. When you see any of the allies in this deck, it's good to see those. You're like, cool, I can play this card. So many of the spells, like I just went over, have so much utility that you can pretty much play it at any point in the game. This is the only card that will really ever feel dead in your hand. And so to me, this almost feels like our 3rd element card, if that makes sense. So this is our crux card because you're not usually playing this turn 1 or, you know, fast, and you're usually doing this in the late game for a very strong effect. Like when you do this on a board of 3 or 4 allies, that is usually game winning. So this feels like the 3rd element card in the deck. And there were games that I drew 2 of these in a starting hand and then even drew the last one like a turn or 2 later. And I like was really, it was the hardest games I had to play because like I said, this deck relies on having so many allies on the board. If half your hand is spells or more than half your hand is spells, that's a very bad position to be in. And it's why we have such a high ally count in the deck. So all 3 of us basically agree that we kind of wish we ran 2. because I would rather see this card a little less than ever see 2 copies of it in my hand, basically. So really, really strong card, but yeah, like I said, maybe consider cutting 1 for like an extra ally or something like that. So, all right, I know that was a lot, but I wanted to explain as much as possible. I'm sure even some of it I could have explained more for the newer players and stuff, but I'm trying to not make this video like an hour long. So let's go ahead and go on to the material deck, because there's a lot to say here as well. Or sorry, not the material deck, but the side deck. So we did a pretty interesting thing where we ran the 8-card sideboard. So we have Azure Trinket. This was helpful for those fire aggro matchups. If somehow we got paired against a random like erupting matchup or something like that, very helpful there as well. We also ran the Crimson Trinket because a lot of wind lists out there are still running really high wind counts. We aren't. We have a very high norm count for a wind deck, which is another reason why I like the deck so much, but this can be very devastating against a wind matchup. Then we have Smoke Bombs and Poison Coating Oil. The reason that I'm going to bring these out and talk about them in the same time is because if you notice our material deck, we have all 3 baubles, right? And every single card in here has a purpose. There are some that you might want to, you know, Tariff and Tithe, you might side out against like specific matchups, but generically every card has a purpose, except for when you go into game 2 and 3 and and game 1 technically too. But when you do go into game 2 and 3 and you can bring in a sideboard, you're not going to be playing against all 3 elements. So we wanted 2 generic cards in the side that we could always take out the baubles for and have some utility no matter what the matchup. Because no matter what the matchup is, Poison Coating Oil is always going to give a stealth unit +2 attack. And we have 8 of them in the deck. And you could even over 2 turns do Smoke Bombs and Poison I keep saying that name wrong. Poison Coating Oil in tandem, because you can materialize this, next turn materialize this, banish this, give something that you have stealth, draw a card, banish oil, give that ally +2 attack, and now you can use this card on any card in your deck, right? So Poison Coating Oil was just like really good. If you want to go even more aggro, really good thing to bring into the deck. You know, if you're playing against a deck that doesn't really need Tithe and stuff like that, this is a really good aggro option instead of Tithe. But generically, these were the 2 cards to replace baubles with if you had nothing else. It's also really important to notice that this can be used in tandem with things like Rallied Advance, so you can start to get a Lurking Assailant hitting for 8 throughout a turn by just materializing 1 card and using 1 card that only costs 2 from hand. So you get in some really, really strong situations with that. And then Smoke Bombs, you can either use to protect your own board, because like I said, your ally surviving is very important, or you can use this to like ping an interceptor, give it stealth, and now that interceptor can no longer block. So very strong against cards like Ascent Protector. Even if you don't have a Dream Fairy in hand and your opponent goes Majestic Spirit, you know, this can get rid of the intercept. They're still gonna have that half damage thing, but if they're close enough to damage, because I had some opponents be on 26, 27 health and bring out a crest or a Majestic Spirit, and you know, I could have done Smoke Bombs plus like swing with a 2 attack ally for game, right? Like it can still utilize that. So, and then next we had kind of a really spicy tech actually, Eye of Argus. This was, I think, the last card that we had updated into the list. It actually came up because we were testing the mirror and just wind so often, and again, we just realized how important Dream Fairy was. So this was another change that we made to the deck because of Dream Fairy's presence in the meta. Giving an ally that you control True Sight until the end of the turn and drawing a card means that you can really just easily clear a Dream Fairy. You know, like we run a lot of 2 attack and 3 attack allies in this list, so this was a really good way to pop a Dream Fairy without needing to be level 1, without needing the Rallied Advance in hand. You know, this was your always accessible Dream Fairy up. So very, very strong card there that did come up. We ran a 1 of Clarent, which all 3 of us didn't really end up using. I certainly sided this in a lot of games, and the theory was strong, but the actual practice of it ended up being a little lackluster. The matchups that this card comes into effect for, you need so many other materializations that are priority before you bring out this card that it just felt a little weak. You know, if you can get this out with like double Weaponsmith on board against a deck that relies on a lot of spell damage, it's really good there for sure. The thought was, and granted, we also didn't play against a lot of decks that like had 4 Purge and Flames or 4 Anger the Skies and stuff that we thought we might run into. We felt that spell-based board clear would be more prominent than attack-based board clear, and we also don't really have a sideboard material card for attack-based board clear anyways. And so this was to stop us from just losing the game against a Purge and Flames or a Anger the Skies. It's also just really good against, Fire Merlin with their fireballs and everything like that, or Rye, especially if, like I said, you're doing the whole Weaponsmith durability counter thing, so that you can start to get to the point where you can prevent like 6 damage from a fireball, which is obviously crazy. However, like I said, it was a little lackluster in actual practice. The theory was solid, but there was just so many other important materializations first that we really didn't get to bring this out in the whole tournament. Then we have Nullifying Lantern. This is a card that, again, the theory was very strong, and we only brought out a few times, but it actually was really important the times that we did bring it out. So I would still keep this in the deck, in the material deck, side deck, whatever you want to say. And if we had faced against more fire aggro matchups, we would have used this card more often. So I think all 3 of our team members played Jimmy, and I believe that's basically the only times that we brought out this combo. This is why Lantern is in the material deck, is because we can combo it with that 2 out of 5 card Grail. And like I said, the only reason we didn't use it more is just because we didn't play against as much fire aggro. I think fire aggro was still represented at the event. Jimmy is a phenomenal player. That's why he had that deck up at those top tables. I think maybe it just lost to a lot of the Merlin matchups and stuff. But fire aggro is definitely going to be sticking around. I think that this is an important side deck combination to have for most decks in the format. And again, this is really the only reason that Grail is around in this format, is basically for this combo right here. A lot of people were talking about Grail Tithe, a lot of people were talking about Grail other cards. I really think it's basically just this. It's a very, very strong side deck option against anything that is graveyard based, like fire aggro, which is depending on their fiery momentums and their eruptings and their rending flames and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like I said, we only brought it out once each, and it was because we've played against that fire aggro list. If we had played against it, we would have used it more, so it was worth the material deck space. And I'm pretty dang sure that that is what helped me solidify my games against Jimmy. So definitely helped since that was in day 2 for me to try to make top 8. So yeah, that is the list. We are also going to be putting up on Patreon a pretty detailed, probably podcast style type video of me, Terry, and Isaac talking about how we landed on this list for Ascent. Because to like spoil that video a little bit, I literally was just freaking out about all of these cards that we were bringing to Ascent. Like, I couldn't believe that after a full month of testing, there were these cards. I'm trying to pull out a couple of them, just some of the most interesting non-meta played cards that we were running 4-4 or 4-3-3 of these, high counts of and stuff. And it at some points just felt like a pile of garbage to me. It just felt like, it just felt like it wasn't a deck that was going to win. And, through our testing, we realized that it would, but it still concerned me sometimes. And so just that whole story of our thought process, our preparation, the way that we, went through the layers of the meta and everything, I think a lot of people would enjoy, but that is going to take a lot of time to talk about. It's probably going to be a longer video and everything, so we are probably going to be paywalling that behind Patreon so that we have the opportunity to do more content like that, because that support is how we're able to do so much content. So we will be probably putting that up as fast as possible, and I'm really looking forward to recording that, talking about that experience, and sharing it with you guys, because I think that there will be a lot of nuggets of wisdom, and I think that it definitely can help you prepare for your next Ascent. And we are here to help the community grow as well. We all just have such a strong passion for GA, so I'm just super glad that the first Ascent ran by Weebs went so well, and we're incredibly excited for Auckland. All 3 of our team members will be going to Auckland, and even the wifes as well. So you can see that group of 6 people, the blue shirt squad at Auckland as well. We had so much fun just meeting all of you guys there. So definitely keep an eye out on the channel. We want to make a ton of content about Ascent, and we enjoyed it so much. And I just want to take a second too and just say thank you to everyone that supported me through it. I've been playing card games for a very long time now, and I've had a second place curse for a while in some of the more recent card games that I've played, and I haven't ever been able to take down an event. So winning the first Grand Archive event really did mean a lot to me, and it was so awesome to see so much of the community in support of it as well. And I'm starting to tear up a little bit because this is super emotional for me, so I'm going to cut the video here, but thank you guys all so much, and we're just so excited for Grand Archive to continue on.